here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Aaron Mate.
So, Aaron, thank you for joining us. As we talk about your report on the rise of militias in Iraq, we're joined by Erin Evers, Iraq researcher for Human Rights Watch. She co-wrote the new report, After Liberation Came Destruction, Iraqi Militias in the Aftermath of Amerli, on the ground in Iraq with HRW since September 2012. Also joined by Matt Akins, award-winning foreign correspondent. His latest piece for Rolling Stone is Inside Baghdad's Brutal Battle Against ISIS. He joins us by video stream from Karachi, Pakistan. Erin Evers, thank you for joining us. As I said, talk about what you found in Iraq.
Well, we essentially documented that after U.S. coalition strikes in the town of Amerli in Salahuddin province routed ISIS from the town of Amerli along with militias and security forces fighting on the ground.
And describe where Amerli is.
Amerli is in Salahuddin, which is north of Baghdad. It's the same province that Tikrit is in. And the town itself is kind of the northeast of the province. So ISIS had been laying siege to this town for 2 months. The ground forces alone were unable to rout ISIS from the town, but then after the U.S. Airstrikes on August 31st, they cleared ISIS from the town, then proceeded to spread out throughout Salahuddin province and neighboring Kirkuk province and attack the Sunni villages in those provinces. So they essentially laid siege to all of the Sunni villages in a pretty broad area, set homes on fire, looted them, in some cases destroyed them with explosives and earth-moving equipment. We used satellite imagery. We were on the ground, obviously, and saw some of the destruction with our own eyes, spoke to about 30 persons who were displaced as a result of this clearing operation. And then we used satellite imagery in order to determine that the damage that we saw was in fact caused by militias and not in the course of fighting or by ISIS. So we had to determine the timeline, essentially, of when what we saw happened so that we could be clear that those areas were under the control of militias and not under the control of ISIS or not, not engaging in battle at the time.
Why are the militias doing this, and what is their relationship to the Iraqi army?
So the militias are not under any formal chain of command. They are leading the fight against ISIS, and they are responsible essentially to themselves. Why they're doing this, I think, is really anybody's guess. But from statements that we've heard from militia leaders, and from what people on the ground have told us that militia fighters were saying to them when they were on the ground, it seems like they were essentially trying to clear the area of Sunnis. And after this campaign, several months afterwards, in January, the same militias went through Diyala province, which is a province neighboring Iran, and essentially carried out the same kinds of operations, except at an even more extreme kind of level. So whereas in this report we documented militias kidnapping people and torturing people, in Diyala we documented the same militias carrying out summary executions of Sunni civilians, and even a large massacre of 72 civilians in one town in Diyala in the course of their fighting.
Is there any evidence they've been doing this with U.S. weapons?
We've seen them with U.S. weapons. We don't know exactly how they've gotten their hands on these weapons. So there's a lot of speculation as to how they're getting the weapons. Some people say that they're getting them through the Iraqi army, which is the official recipient of the weapons, and other people are saying that they're getting them from ISIS, which obviously is also getting the weapons in the course of their fight on the ground.
I want to read you a quote from the former CIA director, David Petraeus, he's also general. He told the Washington Post, quote, "I would argue that the foremost threat to Iraq's long-term stability and the broader regional equilibrium is not the Islamic State, rather its Shiite militias, many backed by and some guided by Iran," Petraeus said. He went on to say, quote, "Longer term, Iranian-backed Shia militia could emerge as the preeminent power in the country, one that is outside the control of the government and instead answerable to Tehran." Your response to this, Aaron?
I think, unfortunately, that's a correct evaluation of where Iraq is headed. So even though, in Iraq right now we have a new government with a reformist prime minister, and his allies are also, definitely keen to rein in these militias to undo some of the kind of very abusive legislation and practices that the former prime minister put in place, unfortunately, the power on the ground that is the strongest right now is the militias, and they are not answerable to the government. There's no accountability for any of the abuses that we've documented on the part of militias. And this is going back even before Mosul fell. The militias were gaining power within the security forces. Once Mosul fell, that relationship flipped, and the militias became the leading force on the ground, and the security forces are kind of following behind.
On the issue of U.S. weapons, there are arms control laws. What has been the White House response about these atrocities potentially enabled with U.S. weaponry?
The White House has not specifically addressed the issue of militias getting their hands on U.S. weaponry, but they have in recent weeks kind of ratcheted up their language. They're voicing concern about militia abuses, about the possibility of militias being sectarian, which obviously is a foregone conclusion. So I think that it's something that the U.S. is seriously considering, but they haven't publicly addressed specifically the issue of militias getting their hands on weapons.
I wanted to ask you about the Iraqi security forces. A report by ABC News revealed U.S.-trained and armed Iraqi military units are under investigation for committing war crimes. This is an excerpt of ABC's report by Brian Ross.
Innocent civilians massacred. Prisoners tortured. Acts that shocked the civilized world. All discovered by ABC News online, not from the usual ISIS accounts, but on social media sites connected to elite units of the Iraqi army, the very forces the U.S. is counting on to help stop such atrocities. Here, a group of men in Iraqi army uniforms give a sign of approval after a civilian is beheaded behind them. In this video, a young boy, a suspected ISIS recruit, is about to be executed, shot dead in the street, with men in what appear to be Iraqi uniforms crowding around the scene. This appears to be an insignia of the Iraqi Special Forces. There are dozens of such videos and still images now being investigated by U.S. and Iraqi authorities to determine if they are in fact part of the Iraqi army. Like these men with a severed head, or these men dragging the body of a captured prisoner. In this video, what appears to be two unarmed Iraqi civilians are about to be murdered, like the others already dead next to them. This video, slowed down, shows militia fighters with U.S.-supplied weapons.
That's an excerpt of an ABC report by Brian Ross. Erin Evers, you reviewed all of this footage for them?
Yes, I did. The sad thing about all of this footage is that it's essentially visual documentation of abuses that other organizations and the media have been documenting for years on the part of Iraqi security forces, and the successive U.S. and Iraqi governments have turned a blind eye to. So the kinds of abuses that we saw in that report, these atrocious, absolutely atrocious acts with no accountability whatsoever, is something that the U.S. government has known about for a long time and just failed to do anything about.
What's their response to you, Human Rights Watch?
Their response to the report was that they have actually withheld aid from specific groups who they knew were committing these abuses before. That's the first time that I ever heard about the U.S. actually withholding aid from abusive groups. That's, of course, their obligation under the Leahy Law, which prohibits the U.S. from providing weapons to human rights abusing forces. But they have never responded directly to us in terms of the allegations, that the kind of documentation that we've done of these kinds of abuses by Iraqi security forces.